Hi, y'all. There's my southern roots showing with my y'all. But hello, y'all. This is Dr. Alicia Wax Thomas, and this is part three of the outline for Western Civ 101, the first outline for your first test, which the title is First Civilizations. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We last left off with the Akkadians who built an empire in the Mesopotamian region. The best known of their leaders was a man by the name of Sargon, and he is credited with building the first dynastic empire in the West. Okay, so next up on the outline or the PowerPoint, we move to the Babylonians. Okay, the Babylonians with Babylon. Now, in your notes, I would like for you to put in parentheses next to Babylonians the word old, because we're going to come across the Babylonians again with the new Babylonians. But if we look here at this map, and once again, this is the Mesopotamian region. You have the Tigris River here to your east. You have the Euphrates River to your west in the area. This is Mesopotamia. This would be the city-state of Babylon. Okay, so that is where we're picking up with for part three of this outline. And like I told you with the Akkadians, typically when you talk about the Akkadians, a lot of historians like to zero in on the most famous of the leaders from the ancient for the ancient Akkadians, and that was Sargon. The same goes for the ancient old Babylonians. Sometimes we say the Amorites, but with the old Babylonians, the most famous of their leaders was a king by the name of Hammurabi, King Hammurabi. Hammurabi ruled the Babylonians approximately, now this is approximation, from roughly around 1792 BC until about 1750 BC. He's best known for a law code that he gave known as the Code of Hammurabi. But before I start talking about the law code, I want you to jot down some other things about Hammurabi. Hammurabi overall is considered in history as having been a very good, a very strong leader. He reportedly had a very well disciplined army, and this is what enabled him to conquer other city states and make an empire for himself. His soldiers were reportedly well equipped. They carried axes, spears. They had copper and bronze daggers. He had learned Hammurabi had the skill of dividing his opponents and subduing them, bringing them down one by one. And by using such methods, he'd actually gain control of the city-states of Akkad as well as other regions of the area of Sumer. And he's credited with being able to eventually, he was the one who reunified the Mesopotamian region almost to the old borders that had been established by Sargon. And the height of the Babylonian Empire was reached during his reign. Once again, we're roughly around the area of, on the timeline, 1792 BC-ish. And what he'd done was he followed in the footsteps of other conquerors. He brought together, or he assimilated, the Mesopotamian culture, and which was primarily made up of Sumerian ways. Don't forget, the Sumerians are credited with creating the first civilization. And Hammurabi had temples built. He had defensive walls built. He was very advanced. He had irrigation canals. And when I still think of that, irrigation canals. And when you look at where you're at on the timeline, on the BC side of the timeline, this guy had irrigation canals. He engaged in, his empire engaged in trade. He had a lot of economic development. As I said, however, he's best known for a law code, and that code is known as the Code of Hammurabi. Some things I want you to know about this law code. First off, Hammurabi himself did not create the law code as far as literally writing each law and coming up with each law. Um, how it worked was the law code basically consisted of about 282, give or take, some laws. And these laws dealt with just about everything that could affect his society or his community. The laws included issues related to family relations, business conduct, as well as crime. Um, the code applied to everyone in the society. And one thing we glean or we know based off of this code is that they definitely had a class system. And go back to your earlier notes where I told you the 6 characteristics of a civilization. If you recall, social classes was one of them. So they were meeting one of the 6 criteria right here is evident in his law code that they had a class system. And we also know because of this law code, that you definitely had distinctions made between a man versus a woman. Um, One of the big aha moments, like what's the big deal about this law code, it is considered as, get this in your notes, this law code is considered as being one of the first major collection of laws in history. Okay. Um, and the law code was very in depth, very in depth. I'm going to just read out some examples to you of the law code. And in law code number 196, it says that if a seigneur, basically a nobleman, has destroyed the eye of a member of the aristocracy, they shall destroy his eye. And this is where a lot of students get the understanding of Hammurabi's code was about an eye for an eye, and they mistakenly think that all people were treated equally in this society, and that is so wrong. And if you put that on the test, you will be marked wrong. It will be very, very incorrect. Law Code 198 states that if he being that same nobleman, has destroyed the eye of a commoner or broken the bone of a commoner, he shall pay 1 mina of silver. So that law code right there already lets us know that if he is of a higher class and has the money, he can buy his way out of his crime if he commits a crime or an egregious a deed to a person of a lower social status. Law Code 209 states that if the nobleman basically strikes another nobleman's daughter and has caused her to have a miscarriage, he shall pay 10 shekels of silver for her fetus. So this law code right here, we know that they put a monetary value on unborn life. And Law Code 210 goes on to state that if that woman has died, they shall put his daughter to death. Once again, this is where a lot of students get that concept of an eye for an eye. And it is true somewhat. You can't just, it's not a blanket truth to it though. Okay. Law Code 211 states that if by a blow he's caused a commoner's daughter to have a miscarriage, he shall pay 5 shekels of silver. So you see right there, if the commoner's daughter, if the nobleman has caused a commoner's daughter to have a miscarriage, he doesn't have to pay as much money for her fetus, because in this society, she was a commoner, so her fetus is not worth as much as the girl who was of noble blood. Let me go back. Law Code 210. We're still dealing with, if this guy has done some harm to another man's daughter and has caused her to have a miscarriage. Okay, so Law Code 210 states that if that woman has died, they shall put his daughter to death. That woman being the noble one. Okay, if the daughter of the nobleman has died, then they shall put his daughter to death. Because what's going on here is if they're in the same social class, then the other nobleman has the right to do the same level of harm to the man who committed the crime that has been done to him. Okay. However, if the man who committed the crime was a nobleman and he did some harm to someone of a lower social class, the person in the lower social class does not have the right to seek revenge on that same level. The nobleman has the right to buy his way out of it, okay, because the man in the lower social class is not as valued. And you have examples that go on and on like that. You have another example. This one deals with adultery. It's Law Code 129. It states that if the wife of a nobleman has been caught while lying with another man, basically they're saying they're in bed together, they're sleeping, adultery. They shall bind them and throw them into the water, meaning tie them together, throw them in the water to drown them. If the husband of the woman wishes to spare his wife, then the king in turn may spare his subject. Well, folks, in the ancient world, a woman was basically property. And it would have been very humiliating for a woman to cheat on her husband and be caught at it. It would be very humiliating and embarrassing for that husband. The chances of that husband sparing his wife would be slim to none. Okay, so that means the woman is dead, and therefore the man who committed the act with her, he is dead too. Right? This, yes, some of you may be saying, wow, this is a very harsh law code. Yes, it was a very harsh law code, but it was what it was. Okay? All right, so once again, with the Code of Hammurabi, the takeaway from this that I want you to get, it is considered as one of the first major collection of laws in history. It had over 280 plus laws. These laws basically already existed. Many of the laws already existed in the various city-states. And when Hammurabi came in and he was able to conquer them, he took laws that he liked and he basically had his scribes. Scribes are the ones who do the writing in this civilization. He had his scribes to come in and basically write them all out. The ones that he wanted. He assimilated the ones he liked together. He may have gotten a law from Ur. He may have gotten a different law from Lagash. There may have already been a law that he liked that existed in Babylon, but he brought them all together in this one document. And this one document is what we refer to as the Code of Hammurabi. And like I said, these laws covered just about every aspect of society you can think of, from relations between a man and a wife, construction or shoddy construction, as you see, issues of miscarriage, of an unborn fetus. I mean, you name it, it dealt with it. Of course, you had laws that dealt with theft, and you had laws that dealt with murder, but it was only an eye for an eye kind of concept if the people were on the same social level. However, if you were not on the same social level, that eye for an eye concept did not apply. The person who was of the higher social level had, so to speak, the upper hand. They would benefit the most out of it. Now, I often tell students, think about this. If you're on the same social level, and say this nobleman has caused the death of another nobleman's daughter, and the one whose daughter died had the right to put the other guy's daughter to death, what in the world do you think would apply if a person was, say, a commoner and did some harm to a nobleman? How do you think the punishment would be acted out? I mean, just really think of that and use common sense. I tell students, use common sense, okay? If it's an eye for an eye and you're on the same social class, imagine if you're of a lower social class and you do harm to someone in a higher social class. Do you seriously think that you're going to be living? I mean, come on. I tell students, sometimes now, let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. Let's just use some common sense on that, okay? All right. So next up, also with this, on this slide, I have the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now this is kind of branching over into literature when we talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. The reason I branch over into literature, and you'll see me or do this often in this class, is because you can learn a lot about a culture simply from reading the literature from that culture, even if it's considered fictional literature. Um, the Epic of Gilgamesh is a collection of stories, and it was passed down through the Sumerian generations. The hero of the story was this man, or this young man named Gilgamesh. Okay, and Gilgamesh, he was the king of the city-state of Uruk, located right here. Okay, we're back in the Mesopotamian region. Okay, Uruk is right there. And basically, the epic tells of the exploits of Gilgamesh. It tells of his uh, adventures. Some claim that they were really fantastic adventures that Gilgamesh had. And the epic is filled with supernatural figures and supernatural events that occurred. The story is very, very old. It's one of the oldest literary stories in history. It's believed that it was recorded or written around the year 2000 BC. It is you can learn a lot from this epic. You can glean a lot about what was valued by the people at this time. Just simply by reading it, you know that they valued precious metals like gold, copper. They also valued gems. We know that they had use of chariots because they talk about it in the epic. We know that they made use of animals for labor, such as mules to carry goods, because all of that's talked about in the epic. We also know that they were polytheistic, because that's mentioned in the epic. Their belief in the various gods and goddesses. But also in this epic that I personally find interesting, this epic talks about a great flood that destroyed the land. And I tell students, if you are coming from a Christian background, some of you are aware of, you know of another great literary piece that many of us do not consider as fictional, that talks about a great flood. Okay? And what I tell students, sometimes what recording of events can do is, if you see an event recorded in one document and then you see a similar recording in another document, those documents sometimes do what we call undergird one another. They support each other, to where it may make you say, I hear it and I read about it here, and I see another group recorded it here. Y'all know what? There may have really been a flood. So I'm not here to push you on that. I'm not going to test you on that, but that's just one of those, let me think about this for a moment kind of things. Okay? All right? But the takeaway for the Epic of Gilgamesh, once again, one of the oldest literary stories in the world, written approximately around 2000 BC. It is from the Sumerian culture. You can learn a lot about the Sumerian culture simply by reading this. And this is going to be the case with literature throughout history. You can learn a lot about a time period simply by reading the literature. Literature in history, they go hand in hand. Okay. When I majored in, I was a double major in school. I was a biology and history major. But in my history classes, I had to do a lot of outside reading as far as the literary pieces from the authors of those various time periods I was studying. And it is very helpful to get a better picture and understanding of what was valued by the people at that time. Okay? All right, so next up, we're moving on. Next up, we move to ancient Egypt. And ancient Egyptian history is extremely, extremely vast. And I say that because I want you to keep in mind this is a survey class. This is not Egyptology. You can actually have a academic major at a university on in Egyptian history. It's called Egyptology. This is just exposure to the tippy tip of the iceberg. It is so vast. I can't even sit here and tell you that you're going to walk away knowing just by listening to this brief lecture, knowing all there is to know. That would be an outright false tale on my part. No. But what are we looking at here when we're saying ancient Egypt? We're going back into the 3000 BC time period here. Ancient Egypt, as many of you know, developed along a very famous river known as the Nile River. Okay, so this is the Nile. If you are not aware, I do want to state that the Nile flows to the north. Okay, it flows this way, it flows upward. And the reason I want you to know that is I think it may help some students with the confusion when I get into Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. Lower Egypt is to the north. Upper Egypt is to the south. And a lot of students on the test, they kind of want to flip it around and put Lower Egypt to the south and Upper Egypt to the north. It is not that way. Keep in mind, water will follow gravity. Okay? So what is basically being said here is that this area of the land, the topography of the land here, is at a lower elevation than right here. Okay? So this is higher. But once again, Upper Egypt is south of Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt, this is where you have the delta region here, where it fans out. Okay? Now, according to ancient Egyptian history, Egypt actually was two kingdoms at one time. Lower Egypt was a kingdom by itself. Upper Egypt was a kingdom by itself. Okay? And according to legend, the king of Lower Egypt, who wore a red crown, which won't be on your test. If you get what color crown he wore, fine. But if you didn't, that's fine too. What happened was that the king of Lower Egypt, and you had the king of Upper Egypt, all right? The king of Upper Egypt, which is to the south of Lower Egypt, he was a king by the name of King Menes, and he's kind of characterized in history as having been a very strong-willed king. And about 3100 BC, the king of Upper Egypt was able to conquer, or basically take over, Lower Egypt and unite all of Egypt into one kingdom. All right? And what he decided to do was to make the capital of his kingdom Memphis. Okay? And according to legend, he made Memphis the capital because this is where Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt met. And so where the two met, this is where he made that his capital. And he's considered as the creator of the first Egyptian dynasty. Now, ancient Egypt is divided into three major time periods. Okay, it's divided into three major time periods. And it covers about, within that time frame of those three periods, are 31 dynasties. I am not covering 31 Egyptian dynasties. Okay? In this survey class, I want for you to be aware of what the three major periods are, or were, and I want you to be aware of the major characteristics of each of those kingdoms. Okay? All right, so your first time period was known as the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom. And the Old Kingdom was roughly from 20, and once again, it's going to vary depending on what sources you use, but it was roughly from 2700 BC until about 2200 BC. And it's going to cover dynasties. Old Kingdom covered dynasties 3 through 6, I believe. And the characteristics of the Old Kingdom that I want you to know, get this in your notes, put a star by it, highlight, underline it, sugar, dust, gold moment. The Old Kingdom is characterized as known as a time period of prosperity and splendor. Once again, it was a time period of prosperity and splendor. Why? This is the time frame in which the Great Pyramids were built. Okay? The ones that, astronauts can see from space. This is that time period. All right? You had pharaohs, Pharaohs. You had pharaohs that ruled this empire, and they ruled with absolute authority, absolute power. And the name Pharaoh basically means great house or palace. Okay. And the ancient Egyptians believed that their pharaohs were basically living gods. Okay. You had no law codes in the ancient Egyptian world, and one of the reasons that law codes was not you didn't have a law code put to use was because it was believed that the pharaoh was the source of all power. He was the law, he was justice, so there was no need for it. Now, the ancient Egyptians did employ or did use writing, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, or I'll mention in a few minutes. But as far as having a written law code, they didn't have that. Okay. So what happened was that the old kingdom eventually came to an end. Okay. So what caused the old kingdom to come to an end? Well, basically, you had a power struggle, power struggles at the top level of society. Okay, people vying for power, fighting for who's going to be, as we say in the terminology today that some of you all use, who's going to be top dog, who's going to be number one. You also had problems with crop failures, and the cost of building those pyramids, some believe, contributed to the collapse of the Old Kingdom. Well, when the Old Kingdom collapsed, you had a period to take place known as the Intermediate Period 1. Okay, the Intermediate Period 1. And the time frame that we're looking at for this Intermediate Period 1 is roughly about 2200 to 2025 BC. This time period, I want you to get this in your notes, is sometimes called the Period of Chaos 1. Okay, Period of Chaos. I'm saying CHAOS. The reason it's called the Period of Chaos 1 is because it was a very chaotic time. Okay, they were killing each other. It was, as we say, a madhouse. It was a lot of infighting. It was a lot of death, a lot of destruction. Okay, and so it was not a good time period. But eventually, what happened was that period ended, and you would see the start of a new kingdom, the second of those three major periods, and that is known as your Middle Kingdom. Your Middle Kingdom. Your Middle Kingdom was, the time frame for the Middle Kingdom was approximately 2025 BC until about 1630 BC. And you're looking at what dynasties? Probably dynasties numbers 11 and 12. Remember, you had 31 dynasties, okay? So with this new Middle Kingdom, it brought in new stability, okay? And the Middle Kingdom, which was characterized, now you still have your pharaohs. You have one pharaoh at a time usually, but you still have your pharaohs. And your pharaoh was now being viewed as a shepherd of his people. Okay, he's like the guiding force of his people. In the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh was seen more as kind of, a lot of people report he was seen more as inaccessible, a god king. Now the pharaoh is viewed with the responsibility to build the public, to build the people, and to provide for the public welfare. Okay, that's why we say a shepherd of the people. During the Middle Kingdom, a characteristic that I want you to get down, this, put a star by, highlight it, underline it moment. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt embarked on a period of expansion. Okay, get that down. It embarked on a period of expansion. And what happened was Egypt went beyond what was its recognized border. And I'm trying to find a map here. I don't know if I have one that will have it on here. But you had what was known as cataracts. Okay. Well, you still have them. But cataracts are areas of the Nile where the Nile will naturally narrow in on itself. And it was around one of those cataracts that the original, when the two were united, where it ended. And what happened was that Egypt went beyond that. They went beyond that first cataract, and they conquered the area south of them, this land called Nubia. Okay, and so what happened was now Egypt has grown. It has grown significantly. So this time period is known, get this in your notes, during the Middle Kingdom, it is known as a period of expansion. Once again, the Middle Kingdom is known as a period of expansion, whereas I told you the Old Kingdom was known as a time of prosperity and splendor. Okay, the Middle Kingdom is known as a time of expansion because they've gone further south on the Nile and conquered more land. All right, what happened here was that eventually the Middle Kingdom came to a close as well. And why did it come to a close? Pretty much same reasons that the Old Kingdom came to a close. Struggle for power. Okay, people wanting power, and that's a theme that you're going to see throughout history, and it still takes place to this very day. All right. So when the Middle Kingdom collapsed, you had what was known as your intermediate period number 2 to take place. Time frame for intermediate period number 2, roughly around 1630 BC, and it lasted until maybe 1550 BC. And this period is sometimes known as the period of chaos number 2. Period of chaos number 2. What happened here during this this second period of chaos that I want you to get down is that you had a group of people who came in and kind of made their presence known here in Lower Egypt. Okay, and they were known as your Hyksos, Hyksos. Once again, Hyksos. And what happened here with this Hyksos is that they came in off of the Mediterranean, and they were like poachers. They just came in and squatted on territory that didn't belong to them. And how long were they there? Not maybe, I don't even think they were there a full century, but well, no, I take that back. I'm sorry, I misquoted. They were there. They dominated that portion for a little more than 100 years. And their presence was definitely known, and it caused a disturbance. All right. Why were the Hyksos able to come in? Well, the Egyptians had already divided themselves. You have to remember, they were in a period of chaos. All right. And the saying divide and conquer is very true. And what happened at this period, the Egyptians actually, they opened the door really for the Hyksos to come in. The Hyksos came in, took advantage of it, but eventually the Egyptians were able to kind of get themselves back together again, and they were able to drive them out. And when they were able to drive out the Hyksos, you saw the Egyptians form what is now known in history as your New Kingdom. Okay, and so your New Kingdom covered the time frame of roughly 1550 till about 1075 BC. Of course, all of this is on the BC side of the timeline. And with your New Kingdom, you're looking at dynasties 18 through 20-ish in there. And by the way, I'm not going to test you on the dynasties, so if you get them down, great. If you don't fret about it. All right. But during this time frame of the New Kingdom, what I do want you to get down in your notes is that the Egyptians were on a new militaristic and imperialistic path. Okay? It's during this time that the Egyptians became the most powerful state in the ancient Near East. That's the big deal about this kingdom. Okay? They are a powerhouse at this point. All right? So we're talking, all right, if you look at this map here, everything in this yellow, the Egyptians are controlling this. Okay, this is the Nile. But what a lot of students are unaware of is the Egyptians came over here as well. Okay, so this is Africa right here. All right, now when you jump over here, you're in Asia. All right, this is what we call the Palestinian region today. All right, so they're all up here. Okay, for those of you who may not be strong in geography, this is Turkey today. Okay, modern day Turkey. All right, so the Egyptians are all up in here. The Egyptians are a force to be reckoned with. They are no joke. They, at this point in history, the Egyptians, they were the powerhouse. It was like wham in your face. It's the Egyptians. Okay, some other things about the ancient Egyptians I want you to know as far as their religion, as many of you may already be aware of, the ancient Egyptians were polytheistic. Okay, they believed in many gods. Your modern Egyptians typically are monotheistic today. The religion of choice often is Islam. It's not the only religion, but it's often Islam, and they are monotheistic today. But we're talking ancient Egyptians here. Your ancient Egyptians, polytheistic. Your ancient Egyptian gods are some of your more studied gods in history, sort of like your Roman gods and your Greek gods. Your ancient Egyptian gods are up there on that level. With the ancient Egyptian gods, basically you had two groups to have special prominence. One would be your sun gods, and one would be your land gods. And the sun god, the most common name used for the sun god was Amon-Re, Amon-Re. It's taught normally that the ancient Egyptians believed that all life radiated from the sun, so he was a pretty darn important god. He was like the god of gods. Then you had your land deities or your land gods, and one of the ones I like to point out to students is the one Osiris. And Osiris is sometimes called the god of the underworld and god of rebirth. According to legend, Osiris, Osiris was married to his sister Isis, Isis, and there's a legend associated with this. Osiris and Isis, there was another brother named Seth, and he was considered as having been the evil brother. And you have different versions of this legend, but according to one, Seth cut Osiris into multiple pieces. Some say 14 pieces. And then tossed him into the Nile, and Isis was distraught, with grief and everything, and she fished him out of the Nile River, tried to restore him, piece him back together, and new life was breathed in him. And because of that, Osiris became a symbol of resurrection and a judge of the dead. And sometimes if you're studying ancient Egyptian culture, you may come across Osiris, and he's usually a god that many of them identified with as one used to try to gain hope, to gain new life. So he was considered one of your more important land deities. His wife slash sister, she was considered as a goddess of love and fertility. With that, like I said, you had multiple gods that the Egyptians believed in, and they're so numerous. I would not require you to know all the Egyptian gods. Also, with the ancient Egyptians, they definitely employed or made use of writing. Okay, we have a special name for the ancient Egyptian writing that I want you to make sure you get down in your notes. It's known as hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics, and it basically, that's coming from the word hieroglyphics. It's coming from the Greek language, and it basically means priestly carvings or sacred writings. Okay. The ancient Egyptians started out like the Sumerians with their writing, in that they used initially wet clay tablets, and they would make impressions into those tablets. So your hieroglyphics initially were carved into, or some say they were carved into stone as well. But later your scribes began to use the papyrus paper, and it was a paper that was made from a reed that grows along the Nile called the papyrus reed. And so they evolved a little bit more with that. Also, with the ancient Egyptians, you have a plethora. That's a nice fancy way of saying a whole bunch, a heap and lot. You have a plethora of art that has been left behind by them. Some of the art has been um, um, studied intensively. Much of it, we're still trying to clearly understand the meanings behind it. Some of the art has yet to be discovered. I personally feel there is far more to the ancient Egyptian world that has yet to be discovered. But that's my personal opinion, so don't put that in your notes. All right. Okay, so moving on from there. I tell you what looks like, where are we at here? We're at almost the 40-minute mark. So I'm going to stop there with this portion of this outline, but this is not the end of the notes. I know, right? Yeah, it is a lot. But there will be a part 4. So please make sure that you cover part 4 because you will need to know that information for your test as well. But for now, this is where part 3 will stop. Thank you.